Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Continuing on from last night's podcast about the 1911 to the AR-15 as promised. Now, the AR-15, why is it an American icon? Number one, it was designed and built in the United States. Number two, there's some cachet around the military version of this weapon called the M16. Now, the AR-15, I believe, was around before the M16 was. Back then, you could have a full automatic rifle as a civilian and no one really batted an eyelash. However, they rapidly changed that to a semi-automatic. And if you didn't know, the AR-15 receiver is dramatic, well, in some ways, is dramatically different than an M4 or an M16. Number one, a traditional AR-15 lower receiver, the part that the ATF tracks, shouldn't be milled for the full automatic pieces. One, they won't fit in there because the back part isn't milled for the shelf. And two, they don't have the facilities for the pins to hold this equipment inside of it. That's the main difference between the AR-15 and the M16. Fast forward some 60 years later after the AR-15's design and implementation, and the military has used it for 60 some odd years, everybody's aunt, uncle, brother, a father, maybe yourselves, has shot one. It is the most ubiquitous rifle in human history for civilian use. Now, why is that? Why is it an American icon? Why is it an American staple? Number one, it's accurate. Number two, it's fairly inexpensive to shoot, or at least it was. It's getting more expensive, but we'll see what happens with the ammunition situation. Magazines, replacement parts, customizability of the weapon. The fact that you can hunt with the weapon anything. And I say anything because you can change calibers with the punch of two pins. You pop two pins, you separate the upper from the lower. You can then mount a new upper on top of it of a different caliber. Up to 50 Beowulf. 50 Beowulf definitely can hunt elk or moose. It's closer in than I'd want to get, but you could definitely do it. You go to the AR-10. So the derivatives of the AR-15, really, the AR-10 is a derivative of the AR-10 because the AR-10 was first designed. Okay, they took that design and downsized it for the 5.56 cartridge or the 223 back in the day. That's what they were looking for, was a light, handy weapon with new materials that you could cause enough damage for your target to incapacitate them or take them off the battlefield. For hunting parlances, in the 5.56 or the 223, you can hunt deer with it, but you have to hand load for it. You need heavier rounds, and it's really suspect depending upon the state's laws that you live in. Last I heard, New Mexico was kind of yes, but it wasn't recommended. Don't take my word for it. Check out a hunting proclamation. But you can also get the 6.8 SPC, the 6.5 Grendel, to with a mag swap and an upper swap. You now have another rifle that you can use to hunt deer with that will cleanly and humanely kill them. Same with elk. I would take a 6.5 Grendel or a 6.8 up against a deer or an elk up to a certain range. Again, closer in. But you see what I'm talking about. You can hunt coyotes, rabbits with this one gun. You can then take it and go train with it. You can use it as one of the most impressive and useful defensive tools on planet Earth. If you hear a bump in the night, the AR-15 is a nice thing to know that how to use, and the capabilities it offers you puts you ahead of the power curve, given that you're already behind the power curve when you're fighting, if you're in a fight. Most of the times, a bump in the night, if it is that type of situation, it's not going to be a good night. Either way. So, there's that. Every branch of service, every cop or law enforcement guy has one of these weapons. If you've ever watched any movie, looked at a comic book, played a video game, you've seen the AR-15 style rifles. There is a cachet around them. From John Wick using them to the Punisher in the comic books using an AR-15 or an M16. I believe his was. I believe Frank's was liberated from an armory, military armory. I'm not sure. Either way, it's been a while since I ever got back into the Punisher comic books. But that just shows how iconic the weapon is. One of the first things that a lot of people were commenting on, including myself, after our withdrawal from Afghanistan, the way it was done and what we left behind, it was kind of humiliating to see the Taliban rearm themselves with our weapons. And why that is so horrible is because the M4 is always envisioned in the American psyche as the American good guy gun. And now, quote unquote, the bad guys, which the Taliban really are bad guys, now have our weapons. So there's this mysticism around the AR-15 also, that it's some sort of magic catch-all term that the media in general like to latch onto, thinking it's some sort of magical tool to just cause death everywhere it goes. There has to be some sort of training that goes involved with this. It is fairly simple to go through, to say the least. But you would need to know the manual of arms of how to use this weapon, which is very easy to find out, especially as common as this weapon is. But that's what is so infuriating to me, especially when they start wanting to regulate things like the AR-15, is they're talking about a gun or a tool that is so common that when you say AR-15 to real gun guys, it's the equivalent of saying car. Did you see that car? Not what make, not what model, not what year, not what color. You say AR-15, that's kind of what I hear. Because there are tons of manufacturers that make them. The original manufacturer, Armalite, went under, was resurrected. They still manufacture a version of it. Palmetto State Armory, one of my favorite companies, they manufacture a clone of it. Daniel Defense has been making defensive weapons forever for law enforcement, since I believe their founders came from the military. So the AR-15 has been manufactured as the patent expired, and you could use less expensive materials, aluminum, polymers for some of the furniture stuff, and you could customize them. One of the biggest fun things about the AR-15, which makes it so iconic, is that you can customize them in any way, shape, fashion possible. And you can do it at home. What I mean is, it is the Lego set for adults. And you can build an AR-15 in the span of 15 to 20 minutes if you know what you're doing with the right tools the right know-how, you can quote-unquote build. What you're actually doing is assembling parts. I can say that because I built the AK from larger things, from just flats and parts. But putting together an AR-15 gives you an idea of what the gun is, what it does. So there's learning involved in that also. The fact that it's so common means that parts are everywhere. That's one thing that's great about the AR-15, is if you need a part from it, chances are you're going to have some friend, or you're going to find the part pretty easily in Western society. Magazines, as big and bad as everybody likes to make them out for standard capacity magazines, 30-round magazines being high capacity magazines. But everywhere you go, that seems to be the standard magazine that's in the gun, so it means that they are supposed to be shipping with that, is what I'm taking it as. Needless to say, the magazines aren't expensive either. You get into some guns, and part of the cost of ownership, especially if you have something like a SIG pistol, or an HK pistol, or a Walther pistol, and you need extra magazines, or you're going to get extra magazines because you're going to actually use the gun, you're going to notice how expensive they are. Well, the AR-15 addresses this, because any magazine you need, even really good quality magazines, are sub $12. This is the poor man, working man's, every man, every woman, every American citizen's rifle. You're calling for, when people try to call for its ban, they're calling for a ban of like the 10mm socket out of a toolkit. It's so ubiquitous, so useful, so known. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows the recoil impulse. If you're a gun guy, chances are this is one of the rifles or one of the guns in your arsenal. You may have multiple examples of this gun, because it is so iconic and it is so useful. I have multiple 10mm sockets. Why wouldn't I have multiple AR-15s? This rifle is going to be around long past any law that is ever put on the books, because you cannot get rid of this gun. The sheer number that have been manufactured, the sheer ability to manufacture parts out of known dimensions, out of known materials, is everywhere. So it's dramatically asinine to me that these people would actually think that they could get rid of the AR-15. But I also don't understand why it matters to them. Yeah, there are people, bad actors, that use it. Do you understand that the reason why it's used is there's a good chance that was one of the only guns in the gun store? Because its popularity, because of its utility. This is why it's an American icon. And it doesn't matter that the military changed to a new caliber and a new gun. The 5.56 will be around forever because of what it's done to this point. People like myself, we like 308s, we like bigger battle rifles. Yeah, we'll migrate that way in some time. But I can tell you that I always have my rifle, my AR-15, and my 5.56 will never go away. Like, share, subscribe, keep New Mexico tactical, and be great.